Memoirs of Aunt Martha. My son gave the house to his wife's family even though I'd been footing their mortgage for 5 years. My name is Martha Jenkins and I'm 70 pushing 71. 5 years ago I thought I was doing the absolute right thing, paying off the monthly note on my son's place, hoping it would be a forever home for my grandkids. I paid with a lifetime of savings, the whole kitty. I'd spent winters telling myself to be frugal, counting every last dime under the glow of a reading lamp. But on the day I figured they'd finally call my name at the family get-together, I found out that house had been signed over to someone else. No heads up, no courtesy call. Some things, if you don't keep a grip on them yourself, nobody else will. And some sacrifices, if you don't value them, will just echo out into nothing. If you've ever loved someone to the moon and back only to stand there when they acted like they didn't know you, then stick around a bit. This story's for you. 5 years. 60 months. Over 1,800 days. I mailed that check every month, never once late. Outside the window of the griddle, the October wind was kicking up dry, yellow maple leaves down the main drag of Black Creek, Iowa. The diner, with its tired, faded vinyl booths and a classic country song on low, was still my Tuesday morning ritual. Black coffee, no additions, one slice of buttered whole wheat toast. Same stool by the window, the one George and I used to share back in the day. With every lukewarm sip, I'd look out at the street. In my head the house would pop up. Every shingle, every porch step. I honestly believed it was where I'd live out my days. But some things just slip through your fingers no matter how tight you clench your fist. More coffee, ma'am? Betty Jo's voice. She's the old-timer waitress, hair shellacked to perfection, soft smile. I gave her a nod, flipping the Ames Tribune to the back where the small-town news pieces were crammed together. I'll leave the check right here for ya. Another nod. A minute later I dug into my purse, pulled out a few crumpled tins. I tipped her 20%. No more, no less. I stood up, buttoned my trench coat. The cold air grabbed my collar as I pushed the door open. The smell of hot apple pie from the bakery next door drifted out, and with it a memory. George and I, first holding hands, walking this very street on an October morning like this. Pie smell in the air. That was half a lifetime ago. George was gone. It was just me and the house. The house. I went back to my own little place. Settled onto the old porch swing that always groaned under my weight. I watched the rose vines clinging to the peeling wood. The roses had gone months ago. Just dry, tangled shoots left, woven together like old memories you can't unravel. I thought that house, the one I paid for, would be the legacy I left for Ben, my only son. I thought a home, a patient heart, and silent giving would be enough. George passed right when Ben started IU. Those first years were rough. I worked 3 jobs and paid off the medical bills the best I could. When Ben married Tatum, I sold off the back lot of my property to help with their down payment. When they struggled, I said, "Sure thing." When they stressed about affording their first kid, I said, "Absolutely." When Ben told me they'd lose the place without my help, I said, "Let's do it." 5 years back, I started sending the money every month, quiet as brewing my morning coffee. No one ever asked. I never made demands. I just figured, when I'm ready to retire, at least I'll have a peaceful spot to land. A familiar SUV pulled up to the curb. Ben climbed out. Oxford shirt, faded jeans. That same rushed, stressed look he always wore. I stood up, smoothed my coat. I waited. "Hey, Mom." He smiled just a little. "Tatum asked me to come talk." I nodded. Didn't press, just waited. "We're thinking of making this year's Thanksgiving a bit bigger. A real shindig. Tatum's folks are coming, the Hendricks, and well, you know how they do things." I nodded again. Ben looked down, avoiding my eyes. "She was wondering if maybe you could chip in a little extra to make it real nice. You know, a few $100 for the catering, maybe the decorations." He hesitated like he expected me to say no, but I never did. I looked at the rose vines, dry and twisted. No hint of a new bloom. "Of course, honey," I said. My voice was so soft, it felt like it belonged to a stranger. Ben gave me a faint smile, the kind folks use when they're sure of the answer before the question's out. "I knew you'd say yes." "Thanks, Mom. Seriously." He leaned in, kissed my cheek, quick and purely routine. When his car pulled away, the dust lifted gently behind it, settling with the dead leaves. I stepped back inside. The old savings ledger was still on the kitchen table. I opened it. The figures were thinning out, bare bones. I flipped to the last page. My shaky finger traced the balance lower than I thought. So low. For the first time, a cold knot formed about everything I'd handed over. It was a weird sensation, like the rug had been yanked out from under me, and all that was left was the cold, exposed subfloor. I closed the book, laid my hand across the worn leather cover. At my age, you learn the hard truths no one spells out. Nobody owes you squat. And sometimes what you thought was rock-solid ground was just a trick of the light. I told myself, just get through Turkey Day. Maybe things will feel better. But sometimes hope is just the excuse you use to hang on too long. When I met Ben's in-laws that Thanksgiving, I finally understood that some changes are permanent. When I met Ben's in-laws, they offered me a polite smile, then looked right through me like I was background noise. The house was blazing with light that Sunday evening, warm yellow light spilling from the windows. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. I stepped inside, adjusted my scarf, and put on the soft, practiced smile I'd gotten used to. A mask I barely noticed anymore. New velvet furniture. A fancy crystal chandelier. Pristine white linen on the long dining table. I saw the Hendricks, Tatum's folks, sitting up straight, hands folded. Gray cashmere sweaters, highly polished loafers. Next to them, a few of Tatum's upscale friends. Polite chatter. Glances that skipped over me like I was part of the decor. Martha. Tatum walked over. Cheeks flushed, lipstick a perfect red. Her forest green dress looking expensive and simple. She kissed my cheek, cold and dry. So glad you could make it. Her tone was gentle, the kind of gentle you learn in prep school. I nodded, stepping further in. Ben was busy pouring wine, keeping his eyes on the bottle. On the table, creamy butternut squash soup was steaming gently. I sat down carefully, the old wool dress I wore feeling out of place beneath the glow of the chandelier, the clinking of glasses, the expensive perfume. Mrs. Hendricks smiled, her teeth perfectly white. We just got back from the islands, she announced, raising her glass. Gorgeous sun, turquoise water, cultured people. Nothing like the Midwest, I tell you. I offered a faint smile, one of those that doesn't reach your eyes, and took my first spoonful. The soup was rich and velvety, utterly foreign to my palate. I ate quietly, partly because I wasn't used to it, mostly because no one was paying attention anyway. The talk drifted to European vacations, prestigious universities, and winter galas. The Hendricks talked about their plans to fund a program for inner-city kids this year. Their eyes skimmed over me when they mentioned those less fortunate parts of the city. Nice words, but the way she tilted her chin felt like a tiny, invisible pinprick. Tatum laughed and leaned toward me. If it weren't for Mom Evelyn helping out with the mortgage those first few years, we never would have landed a house like this. The laughter that followed was light, but it felt sharp like tiny pieces of shattered glass. Our great benefactor, Tatum added, half joking, half serious. Ben gave a strained smile, then fixated on his glass of Cabernet. I put down my spoon, hands loose in my lap. The chandelier's warmth didn't touch the chill in my chest. I looked around the table, the delicate canapes, the shiny silverware, the rehearsed smiles, the distant eyes, and it hit me. I was no longer the matriarch of Ben's family. I was just someone they used to know. No longer needed, no longer the center of gravity. The dinner wrapped up slowly with stiff hugs and cool handshakes. I made my excuses early, saying I had to be up at the crack of dawn. Tatum walked me to the front door. Ben stayed inside, busy seeing the Hendricks out. Outside, the wind bit. The streetlights flickered, few and far between. I tightened my scarf and started down the brick path. Dry leaves crunched beneath my feet. On the porch steps, Doris Dobbins, my old neighbor, was waiting, thick cardigan on, hands around a steaming paper cup. Heading in, Martha? Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact. I nodded. She held out the cup. Take this. It's stiff, but it'll warm you up. I took it. My cold fingers brushed the gentle heat. We sat together on the bench by the porch, not talking, just watching the yellow streetlights fade into the distance. Neither of us rushed to break the silence. I used to think, she said after a long while, that if I gave enough, people would finally see it. They'd get it. She paused. Turns out that's not how the cookie crumbles. I looked at her. The light from inside the house cast a soft glow on our shoulders. Doris stared straight ahead, her eyes cloudy but oddly bright. Kids got their own path, she said. It ain't their fault. Ain't ours either. We just gotta learn when to dig in and when to cut the rope. I gripped the cup tighter. The warmth seeped through my thin skin, something I couldn't name. For a moment I recalled my mother's old saying. When nobody remembers to cherish you, Martha, you cherish your own self. Thanksgiving morning they asked me to come early to help in the kitchen. But when I got there wasn't a job for me. Thanksgiving morning. Black Creek was veiled in a soft layer of fog. Along the streets, homes glowed with pale golden porch lights. At the post office the flag hung low, barely moving in the breeze. I drove past it all, tires rolling over damp layers of fallen leaves. The radio was playing oldies I didn't bother to turn off. Memories stirred. Those old Thanksgivings. Our tiny bungalow back when George was still here. The kitchen hot with the smell of roasted turkey and sweet potato casserole. Kids' voices echoing. Plates piled high, chairs crammed around a wooden table with a big extension leaf added just to squeeze us all in. Now all of it existed only in my mind. Faint, like the breath that fogs the window glass in the morning chill. Ben's house was bright as a lantern. I stepped up to the porch, pulled my scarf close, my arm trembling slightly under my heavy coat. Tatum opened the door, hair perfectly done, a crisp white apron over a deep red velvet dress. Oh, you're here. Come on in quick. We're running ragged getting things ready. Her voice was sweet as always, but her eyes flicked briefly over my old wool dress. A hesitation she didn't voice. Inside, the kitchen was already buzzing. The Hendricks, a few of Tatum's friends, even Ben, all crowded around the sink and the granite counters. I reached for the back of a chair, looking for an entry point, a way to be useful, but there was no space. The counters were covered in platters and serving dishes. Cinnamon candles mingled with the rich scent of the turkey roasting. Tatum handed me a cloth sack. Mom, could you shell these pecans for me? She smiled, but her eyes didn't connect with mine. I nodded and sat on a low stool by the back door, the kind of seat nobody wanted, the kind nobody noticed. My fingers shook as they cracked the dry shells. Around me laughter rose, glasses chimed. Talk of trips to Vegas, Caribbean cruises. None of it landed near me. It all floated right past. The turkey was presented in the center of the long table. White linen tablecloth, pale yellow mums scattered across it. Candlelight flickered in glass holders. I washed my hands, grabbed a plate, and slipped quietly into a seat at the far end. Ben stood up, tapped his glass lightly and smiled. The light caught his face. He had those little stress lines around his eyes now, but in his gaze I still saw the boy I held when he took his first step. I just want to thank everyone for coming today, he began. And while we're all together, he paused, looking at Tatum. She nodded, her smile holding something I couldn't figure out. We wanted to share some big news. As we start a new chapter for our little family, we've legally transferred the deed to this house to Tatum and her parents. A stunned moment followed. Then applause broke the quiet, scattered, cheerful congratulations. I sat there, wine glass in hand. My lips stretched into a smile, strained, crooked. The turkey still smelled amazing. The candles still glowed. The glasses clinked in celebration, but I didn't hear a thing. Just a cold, hollow silence wrapping around me like the morning fog. This house, the one I thought was Ben's, the one I'd been secretly paying off month after month. Every brick, every inch of the yard, connected to sacrifices I'd made. All of it signed over. No discussion. No advance warning. Tatum laughed gently, pouring more wine into my glass. Now you can finally put your feet up, Mom Martha. Seriously. Laughter again. I laughed too. But as I lifted the glass, my hand shook. The wine shimmered golden under the candlelight. I drank it fast. The burn hit the back of my throat, sharp and warm, but it couldn't thaw the ice in my chest. In the corner of the room, the light angled just right. Catching my tired face, my thin, brittle fingers curled around the empty glass. I set it down gently, definitively. My last glass of wine in this house. And with it, I set down everything I had left. The last wine, they say the first one to walk away from the familiar is the one who lost. I don't buy that for a second. It was the first morning of December, cold enough to bite. My house was silent except for the groaning hum of the old furnace. I woke up earlier than usual, brewed a strong pot of joe, and stood by the kitchen window, staring out at a sky heavy with gray clouds. On the porch, the season's first snowflakes drifted slowly past the glass, tiny and weightless. I wondered how many winters I'd stood here waiting for something that was never going to show up. Pulling my sweater tighter, I grabbed the empty moving box and started packing. Not much. A few faded photos, some well-loved paperbacks, the blue and white china tea set George gave me for our anniversary. I wrapped everything carefully in soft towels and placed them inside. The wedding photo on the mantel. I took it out of the frame, folded it gently, and slipped it into my coat pocket. Every item I handled was a piece of history, but this time I didn't let myself drown in it. My mother used to say, "Nobody's coming to ride to the rescue but you, sweetheart." When I sealed the last box, I let out a long, quiet breath. The sound stretched out in the empty kitchen, echoing like a spoon dropped in the dark. That's when I heard a car pull up outside. Through the fogged window I saw Ben. Gray overcoat, hands in his pockets, hesitant. I opened the door. He climbed the steps looking down. "Mom, you're really leaving?" I nodded, tightening my scarf. He stepped closer. The scent of cheap aftershave and cold air mixed in the space between us. "You don't have to do this. We still have room." His voice trailed off like he didn't quite believe his own words. I looked him in the eye. The same eyes that once teared up when he learned to ride his bike, that once shone with pride the day he got his diploma. Now they just looked uncertain, miles away. I took a deep breath, felt the cold settle into my bones, and replied, calm and firm, "I've given enough, Ben. This house and all the hope I poured into it. It's time I cut it loose." Ben pressed his lips together, but he didn't argue. I turned, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back at him standing on the porch. I locked the door. The cold metal key chilled my fingers. For the first time, I didn't stop to look at the rose vines on the railing. Didn't glance back at the house from the steps. I just walked. Black Creek streets were hushed under the snow. A white blanket covered the rooftops. Bare oak trees cast long, thin shadows across the frozen ground. My old car started slowly, tires crunching over the ice. I stopped by the First National Bank on the corner, the glass windows fogged up, the old wooden sign hanging low. Inside, the tellers were familiar faces from the diner. They nodded, half surprised, half understanding. A young woman with her hair pulled back gave me a small, polite smile as I asked to close the auxiliary account, the one I used to wire money to Ben every month. "Mrs. Jenkins, right? I've seen you at the griddle. I remember you always sat by the window reading the paper every morning." She smiled again, softly. I didn't answer. I signed the papers, took my check, and left. Outside, I ran into Doris Dobbins by the fence line, holding a warm apple pie wrapped clumsily in a checkered tea towel. "Baked this morning," she said, offering it to me. I took it. The warmth seeped through the cloth into my cold hands. "Good luck, Martha." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Folks who've weathered enough storms know the kindest wishes are the ones you leave unspoken. I nodded my thanks and walked to the car. When I got back to the house, I paused, not out of regret, but to confirm something to myself. I had done my part. I had loved. I had sacrificed. I had waited. And now I chose to end it. I opened the trunk, put the box inside. One hand held the pie. The other slid the key into the ignition. The door closed, shutting out the cold. I was leaving. I didn't call Ben, didn't text Tatum, didn't tell anyone I was pulling up stakes. This quiet exit was the last thing I still had claim to. The one thing that was mine. I started the engine. The car rolled forward. The white snow faded in the rearview mirror. No one stood at the door to wave me off. No lights flipped on. No hands reached out. I drove on. Didn't look back. The house wasn't home anymore. I wasn't running away. I was finally choosing myself. I used to think my life was just a waiting game. Turns out I still had the right to start over. The little house sat tucked away at the end of a gravel road on the outskirts of Black Creek. A weathered wood cabin with a dull gray roof, the front yard bare and covered in snow. The windows were small, the curtains faded, but the winter sun still slipped through, casting faint streaks of light across the patched wood floor. I stood on the steps, the new key pinched between two fingers. No red ribbon, no celebratory cheers like the first time George and I bought a place. Back then we were young, broke, but convinced the world was our oyster. That first home was just as small and just as beat up as this one, but it smelled of fresh paint and morning sun pouring in, the kind of light that makes you believe tomorrow's gonna be better. I took a deep breath and slid the key into the lock. The door groaned open, releasing the scent of damp wood and dust. I didn't flinch, just stepped inside and hit the light switch, a flickering dim bulb overhead. I dropped my bag on the floor, unwound my scarf. Outside, the wind rattled the bare apple tree in the yard, casting long thin shadows across the snow. Buying a place on my own. No permission, no advice, no waiting around. Just me. It felt both freeing and scary. An emptiness I recognized but couldn't quite name. Like being in a dark room knowing the light switch is right there. If only I'd reach for it. 2 days later I started fixing it up. Every morning, bundled in thick sweaters and a tight scarf. I painted the walls, scrubbed the grout, patched the leaks. The wooden step stool wobbled. The smell of fresh latex paint stung my nose. But every single brushstroke felt like a dose of new life. In the afternoons I worked in the yard. The snow was still deep, but I cleared what I could, pulled out frozen weeds. The roots of the apple tree barely stirred beneath the cold dirt. I didn't know if anything was still alive down there, but I knelt anyway, touching each root gently, like I might wake up something fragile. That day, as I was planting small wild black-eyed Susans along the fence, I heard a sound. I looked up and saw an old man in a worn baseball cap leaning on a cane, watching me from across the wire fence. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Morning," I replied, standing and brushing dirt from my gloves. "Name's Harold. Live 2 houses down. Used to be the head groundskeeper over at Black Creek High." He held out his hand. I shook it. Rough, cold, but steady. "Martha," I said simply. He looked at me for a moment, then squinted. "Trying to save those half-dead apple trees, are ya?" I smiled faintly and shook my head. "Just giving it a shot." Harold leaned on his cane, his eyes scanning the cleared patch of yard. "Not everything needs saving. Sometimes you just gotta give it time to pull itself up." Then he bent down and stuck a bamboo stake beside the biggest apple tree. "I used to think I had nothing left to start over with," he said. "Turns out there's always something, if you're willing to dig for it." He turned slowly and walked back home. I watched him go. A lightness stirred in my chest, soft as falling snow. That night I cooked my first meal in the new kitchen. Simple. Chicken noodle soup and buttered toast. The stove was old, the gas burner uneven, but the smell was warm and comforting. I set the table by the window, lit a single white taper candle. Outside, the snow was still falling, fine and thick, blanketing the backyard. I poured a cup of black tea for myself and settled into the one comfy armchair I'd brought from the old house. Sipping the tea, I leaned back, letting the light from the desk lamp cast soft shadows across the floorboards. For the first time in years, I felt like I didn't owe a soul anything. No one waiting for me to take care of them. No one expecting me to step up. No one asking for my yes or my silence. I was free. No strings attached, no trades, no promises. I'd lived for other people long enough. Now it was my time. And like a field after a cold snap, my heart would bloom again. Slowly, but surely. Winter always has to give way eventually. By March, Black Creek had started to shake off its heavy coat. The roads were slick with melting ice, and the dull gray lawns were hinting at patches of tender green. This morning I stood on the porch with a hot cup of tea, watching the last drops of ice slip from the apple tree and fall onto the weathered steps. The air smelled of wet earth, raw and honest, with a trace of lingering chill. But somewhere in that breeze I could smell spring. Faint, fleeting, but real. Across the street, Doris Dobbins was folding a checkered wool blanket over her porch chair. She looked up, caught my eye, and smiled. I nodded and stepped back inside. This morning was the town book club meeting. The first time in forever that I walked into a room full of strangers and didn't feel like an outsider. The Black Creek Public Library was small. Its mint green paint chipped, the low windows fogged with condensation. The reading room was warm, the fireplace crackling with slow-burning logs. I chose a chair tucked in a corner where soft sunlight slipped through the thin curtains. Today's read was Little Women, an old chestnut, but it still warmed something inside me. Doris Dobbins read aloud, her voice steady and calm. She got to the part where Beth sets the table, her hands trembling with fever, but her eyes quietly full of joy. There are satisfactions that don't need a loudspeaker. The meeting broke up. I lingered to return the book, listening to the quiet murmur of conversations around me. Snippets of stories, gentle pats on the shoulder, casual handshakes. Things that used to feel distant now felt almost normal. On the library steps, I heard a whisper behind me. They say the Carter house is about to be foreclosed on. Ben and Tatum both got laid off. Took out second mortgages for cars and bad investments. Nothing much left of the place. I didn't turn around. Just pulled my scarf tighter and kept walking. Black Creek held its annual spring flower fest. As always, stalls lined the town square. Tulips, daffodils, and wild daisies blooming in a messy, cheerful mix. I received an invitation from Ben. A thin card. His signature rushed. The message was polite, with a hint of an apology. An invitation to a reconciliation dinner. I folded it in half. Didn't rip it. Just left it on the table beside the cold teapot. Late that afternoon, Doris Dobbins knocked on my door. I've got 2 tickets to the fest. Want to come? I nodded, grabbed my coat and stepped out. We walked along the stone path beneath trees just starting to bud. Black Creek folks bustled around the stalls, their voices light with laughter. The scent of funnel cakes and buttered popcorn drifted through the air. I wasn't searching for anyone, wasn't worried about who I might bump into. By twilight, we walked back toward our street. Cutting through the alley, I stopped in front of my apple tree yard. The snow had melted in patches, showing dark, damp earth, and in that cold soil, a few tiny green shoots had started to push up, tentative, tender. I crouched down, brushing a fingertip against one. Its leaf was paper-thin, but its stem clung fiercely to the rough bark of the old tree. I smiled. A genuine smile. Not forced. Not sad. I had made it through the winter. Not just the one outside, but the one inside me. The long, quiet winter that felt like it would never end. And now, looking at those fragile buds pushing through the hardened ground, I knew I had done the same. I didn't need anyone to grant me spring. I had planted it myself. Beneath the March sky where tiny blossoms pushed through the cold ground, I realized something. You don't need anyone to grant you spring. You can sow it yourself. And that is enough. I used to think love meant endless sacrifice, silent endurance. But I've come to understand that if you don't learn to cherish yourself, there will come a time when even those closest to you may turn away. Like an old quilt that kept everyone warm through countless cold snaps. When the sun comes back, people forget how much they relied on it. I place a hand over my chest, where the steady rhythm still beats, slow but strong, like the old apple tree that somehow made it through the harshest winter of its life. No one needs to give me anything. No one needs to remember. It's enough that I'm still here. Steady, quiet, resilient. So if this story reaches you, take a beat, pause, and ask yourself, have you been kind enough to your own heart before you tried to warm the whole damn world?